So I think if I can sort of bring everybody back to order to get you out sooner, I'm going to make my closing remarks now, and then we'll have Senator Klobuchar make her remarks. So a couple of things I think from today. One is I think one of the key things if we're going to make progress on this, and we desperately need to make progress on this in Washington, I was really struck by what Congressman Ehrlich and Congressman Hill said about there really doesn't seem to be a mass uprising in the populace to demand innovation and competitiveness policies from their elected members of Congress. It really is unfortunate, but that seems to be the case, and it tends to be more of an inside the Beltway issue. And the problem with it as an inside the Beltway issue is that there aren't enough bipartisan forces inside the Beltway. So let me start off by saying sort of a big challenge maybe, and let me suggest that I would challenge by the end of the year having the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO host a major joint event to bring together leaders from both sides of the aisle, union and business, to come together to begin to agree on a bipartisan competitiveness and innovation strategy. Because I think it's only really if the forces in Washington, if you will, start speaking more with one voice that we're really going to be able to make the kind of progress we need. Can we do these slides also? Secondly, what can you all do? Okay. In a completely self-serving sense for us, you can do a couple of things. One is we're going to be posting the video of this event on our website. It'll be right on the homepage there. You can see all the slides will be there. In addition to the slide decks that we're running in the morning and in the afternoon with what are the problems, what are the challenges, what are really the opportunities there. So I encourage you to look at that, tweet about it, share it with your colleagues. There'll be video as well as that. Second, we have a new feature at ITIF which we call the Policymakers Toolbox. It's just under our Projects tab there, and it's an attempt by us, at least initially, to list every single actionable policy idea that we've developed, and over time we're going to make it more of an open source tool where we would include any good idea, whether it's from a competitor think tank or from anybody, that we think are good ideas that we need to do and that are actionable. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Thirdly, we have developed a new blog, Innovation Policy blog, where we've asked about 25 of the leading, what we would call non-ideological, pro-innovation thinkers in the country and, in fact, the world, to contribute on a regular basis. And what we're trying to do with Innovation Policy blog is create a space of people who are totally pro-innovation, they're pro-market, and they're pro-government. They're not saying it's only one from column A but one from column B. And it's not a blog that we control. We don't censor any voices. A lot of the voices are ours, but a lot of the voices are others. So I encourage you to take a look at that. Last, if you're interested in a fun activity, we've done a lot of work on what we call innovation economics. How do we get economics to be a reflection of how important innovation is? And if you're interested, you just go to innovationeconomics.org. You can click on Learn Your Economic Type, and you can take a test that will probably take you about 15 minutes. It's not a test like when supply expands, what direction does the demand curve move? We're not asking those kind of questions, but it's more like, if you had $100 billion, what would you do with it? Would you cut taxes? Would you expand NSF? It's sort of those kinds of questions. And at the end of it, what will pop up will be one of 4 pictures. It'll be a picture of Art Laffer. In other words, you're a supply sider. Or a picture of Keynes, you're a Keynesian. A picture of Bob Rubin, you're a sort of liberal neoclassicist. Or a picture of Joseph Schumpeter, you're an innovation economist. So I encourage you to take that. It's kind of fun. And this is a good segue. I see now that Senator Klobuchar has joined us, so it's actually a wonderful segue into her remarks. The Department of Commerce has just issued a Federal Register notice for request for comments on their strategy for American innovation. You don't have to remember that URL. It's a long one. We'll have that URL on our homepage. I encourage you to go to that and file your thoughts and suggestions with the Department of Commerce. This strategy, which I think is actually one of the most important things that the federal government will be doing this year, we can thank Senator Klobuchar for that. It was her leadership and legislation, along with Senator Warner and Senator Lemieux, but really her leadership that enabled that idea to come about. It's charged the U.S. Department of Commerce with doing this. They're working now closely with the NEC, and if you heard our event yesterday with Austin Goolsbee, Austin was talking about this and how this is an important step. So we're really honored and pleased to have Senator Klobuchar with us today. As our keynote lunch speaker. Senator Klobuchar, as you all know, she was elected in 2006 from the state of Minnesota. She currently serves on the Joint Economic Committee, the Ag, Nutrition, Forestry Committee, the Judiciary Committee, and most importantly for us today, Commerce, Science, and Transportation, where she chairs the subcommittee on competitiveness, innovation, and export promotion. And it's really there that her leadership on calling for specifically here for an American innovation agenda, but really on a wide variety of issues around how do we get more exports, how do we drive innovation. Her creativity and leadership, I think, has really been outstanding in driving a whole set of new proposals. In fact, I hope you'll talk about your new legislation today that you'll be, or you may have already introduced it, but I know it's in the works. She's has also authored legislation to help small business tap into new markets abroad. She helped pass the Travel Promotion Act. She's also worked in a very bipartisan way, very much along the theme of what we talked about today, that we have to solve this in a bipartisan way. She fought for the creation of a bipartisan commission to address the nation's debt crisis. She's helped pass sweeping ethics reform. Her work has gained national recognition. Working Mother magazine named her in 2008 as Best in Congress for her efforts on working families. The American Prospect named her as a woman to watch. The Washington Post described Senator Klobuchar as a rising star, and the Star Tribune in Minneapolis reported on her substantial progress, calling her a fast-moving legislator. Prior to coming to the Senate, Senator Klobuchar was a prosecutor for Hennepin County in Minnesota, which includes Minneapolis, its 45 suburbs. She was also a partner in 2 of Minnesota's leading law firms. And she has a degree, magna cum laude, from Yale University and a University of Chicago law degree. And also has a book, which I didn't realize, which is probably still on Amazon, I hope. Okay, or on Kindle. Barely, it's on Kindle. Her senior essay in college actually was published as a book, Uncovering the Dome, about the 10-year history to build the Hubert Humphrey Metrodome. So I hope that wasn't the dome that collapsed the roof recently. Okay, all right, so please join me in welcoming Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Okay, yeah, it was the dome that collapsed. And what you should know, Rob, it was so funny you raised Amazon, because before the dome collapsed, it was going for about $6.99 on Amazon. And then after the dome collapsed, it went up to $21.99 with the remaining copies. So thank you so much. They did try selling it next to the Vikings purple inflatable swords at one point at the dome, and it didn't do very well. So that's when I decided to go to law school. I want to thank Rob and the rest of the team at Information Technology and Innovation Foundation for organizing this great conference. I apologize for being late. We were voting on the Patriot Act reauthorization over in the Judiciary Committee. The ITIF has certainly been an invaluable resource to me in providing analysis and insight on the state of innovation in America. Rob has been incredibly helpful when we were working to reauthorize the America Competes Act, and I also will say that he helped a lot with the latest innovation that legislation that he mentioned that we introduced, America Innovates Act, and that is actually something I did with Scott Brown, my Republican colleague from Massachusetts, and Senator Lamar Alexander and Senator Warner are now joining us as co-sponsors. And I will tell you, I know that Rob is always up for new things, given that he decided to come to Minnesota in 11-degree weather this January when we did a forum with Senator Warner. We of course in Minnesota call that weather balmy. It really wasn't that bad, but I think he was a little surprised. And I'm also excited to be here with so many great leaders, including Paul Jacobs from Qualcomm. The reason I got so interested in this issue in innovation is, first of all, based in my state. Minnesota brought the world everything from the pacemaker to the Post-it note. We are actually, right now, 6 in the country for the number of patents, and number 2 for total number of medical device patents. And we actually are number 1 in the country per capita for Fortune 500 companies, which is something that people are surprised by. We're 7th for Fortune 500 companies and 21st for population. And a lot of that has had to do with our education system. We have a fairly educated workforce, but also with our belief in innovation and moving forward with new ideas. These are uniquely American ideas, this idea of innovation and building things, new things from scratch. When you think of our country as a whole, it's our inventors who developed the light bulb, the assembly line, the internet, the iPod, and yes, Facebook.com. So we have this legacy of groundbreaking technologies. But when you think about it, our first was mentioned, our patent reform bill that we just passed. It's been 60 years since we even looked at that, and you think about how the world has changed since then. So we actually passed the America Invents Act finally after years of trying in the United States Senate. We got that done this week with Senator Leahy's leadership. I got to manage the bill on the floor for a few of the days, and while there were still ongoing fights, we were finally able to work that out. There's a speech that John F. Kennedy gave at Rice University in 1962, the one that confirmed his commitment to sending a man to the moon. And in that speech he said, "The U.S. was not built by those who waited and rested and wished to look behind them. It was conquered by those who moved forward." Well, these words surely ring true today. The studies that Rob is involved in that show that we are now 6 out of 40 industrialized nations for innovation, last in our efforts to improve our innovation. Certainly it looks to me like we are at this moment in time resting on our laurels, and we're just not going to make it if we keep doing that. I always think about the Beijing Olympics in 2008, the opening ceremonies. I remember watching them with my family on this fuzzy TV in northern Minnesota, and seeing those 2,000 perfectly synchronized drummers. And in the opening ceremonies, I remember watching it thinking, we're in so much trouble. And since then, those drum beats are only getting louder and louder and louder. And while China is building high-speed rail and millions of solar panels every day, we're still fighting over what our energy standard should be. And while India is encouraging invention and entrepreneurship, we're still playing red light, green light with our R&D tax credit. And while Brazil is training more engineers every day, we're still falling behind on our test scores when it comes to math and science. The truth is that our country can no longer afford to be a country that simply churns money, something that we've done well for the last few decades, but we just can't rely on that. We can't just rely on churning money and shuffling paper and consuming, importing, and spending our way to huge trade deficits. What we need to be, again, is a nation that makes stuff, that thinks, that exports to the world, a country where you can actually walk into stores and turn over goods and see the words "made in the USA." In the words of Tom Friedman, who, by the way, not only is a New York Times columnist, but also a Minnesota native, we need to be doing nation building in our own nation. What is this competitive agenda about? And I know many of you have your own perspectives of this. I have the perspective from my job, which is as a senator, and trying to figure out what policies can we be putting forth that will actually help the private sector to innovate again. And the first thing, when the president talked about winning the future, the first thing that I think you need to do if you're going to win the future is to make sure that our education system is up to par. Talking to some of our CEOs in Minnesota, one of the things I've learned, you always hear about lower wage jobs going to other countries. Well, we're starting to see some of our higher wage jobs going to other countries. And here I talk about the repair and the making of robotic equipment, or the running of plants that has robotic equipment. And that's because of the skills that people are starting to acquire in other countries that match the skills that we have in the United States, despite the fact that the corporations themselves may be located in this country. Touring a lot of our colleges and universities and technical schools in Minnesota, I've learned a few things. Number one, the kids that really stick with it with math and science and engineering almost always get jobs. 2-year technical degree out of Alexandria, Minnesota, Alexandria Tech, 96% placement rate. Now, these kids aren't getting PhDs, but they're actually getting degrees that they need to run complicated computers that run complicated assembly lines. This just isn't your grandpa's Votech anymore. This has gone a long step beyond that. Making sure that our college research, this is something we learned, worked on with Rob, isn't just collecting dust on the shelves, that it's actually producing goods, and that's why we're working to fund that research during that time period where you call the Valley of Death. Creating incentives for more kids to not just go to start majoring in math and science and engineering, but actually graduating with those degrees. Making sure that we have more STEM high schools. You know, they're working well, but our bill actually, and it's all paid for, bipartisan bill, creates 100 more STEM high schools in this country. I can tell you that I'm not just talking the talk, I live it. Just last weekend, my daughter moved on to the Northern Virginia Regional Science Fair with her. She's 15 years old, and I've just been shocked by how these kids are devoted to these science experiments. Her experiment is about oil spills, and she took a BP oil pad, and she took human hair, because remember, people were collecting human hair during the oil spill to absorb things, and she took straw, and she put them in nylons, not mine, and dipped them in crude oil, motor oil, and water. This took 3 days. It was really smelly and really messy in our kitchen, but she triumphed and went on to the Regional Science Fair, and last Sunday was named one of the 13 Northern Virginia kids to go to the Virginia State Science Fair. So there we go. So I truly believe that getting these kids involved in this and moving on to the college level and beyond is going to make a huge difference, and it has to be a national call to action and a change in our culture. I know immigration was discussed earlier by Paul Jacobs, but included in this would be this idea when kids are coming over to our country to study and they get an advanced degree, why would we just staple a do not apply sign on their diploma, allowing them to stay and start the next Google in this country instead of starting it in India or China, I think is a very good idea. Add to that the H-1B visa situation. We tried to work something out for this bill, and it didn't make it in off the cutting board, but I hope I can do something else on it with the H-1B visas tied to unemployment rates so that we can look at those caps, which I know is such a difficult thing. And I can tell you what's happening. Our companies in Minnesota then contract at best. They contract with people in other countries instead of having people work and pay taxes in our country. Taxes. We need consistent R&D tax incentives and a better process for commercializing university research, as I mentioned before. There's some interesting proposals in the Deficit Commission report that are worth looking at, which actually suggest retaining the R&D tax credit, but also bringing the corporate tax rate down from 35% to 28%, individuals at 28, 22, and 12, and really closing some of the loopholes that we have in our system. Now, for one business, what's a loophole is for other a business an advantage, but I truly believe bringing that tax rate down is going to make us more competitive internationally. Exports. I chair the subcommittee on competitiveness, innovation, and exports. One of the things that has really excited me is not just the work that our big companies are doing and the increase we've seen in exports from companies in Minnesota like Cargill and Medtronic and 3M and others, but it's also about some of our small and medium-sized companies and the export work that they're doing. That's where the foreign commercial service comes in. Talk about good bang for your buck. These people help these small and medium-sized companies to locate markets, to check out whether a customer is real. Some of them work at our embassies. Some of them work in regional offices in our country. I give you one example, a company called Matrax in Carlstead, Minnesota, which is the moose capital of our state. And this guy had a second grader named Matt who came home from school, and he drew a picture of a truck for his dad. And the truck had tank tracks on each of the wheels. And his dad said to the kid, Matt, that's just not how it works. The tank tracks, you've seen it on the movies, they go between the wheels. And the kid says, no, Dad, this is so much better. You can put the tank tracks on, and then you can take them off. Well, his dad's a mechanic. He goes to a shop, and he designs this tank product for the tracks going on the wheels, and he calls it Matt Tracks after his second grade kid. This is a true story. And so he leaves one day, his 4 employees producing this stuff, and he decides he's going to drive over to Fargo, where the Foreign Commercial Service is located for this part of Minnesota. And this guy is not a pro-government guy. He's a pretty conservative guy, but he doesn't know how in the world he's going to, with his 4 employees, figure out what markets might want his product. A woman named Heather, who works for the Foreign Commercial Service, takes on his case, plugs it into the computer. Within a year, because of that visit, he is now exporting to 25 different countries, and he has 40 employees from Kyrgyzstan to Kazakhstan in a town that has 700 people. So that's one example. Daryl Ackerman, southern Minnesota, in the middle of a cornfield, he makes this large piping that goes underground and moves pipes. It's called trenchless digging. And guess who wants that? China and India, as they finally put in more water infrastructure and sewer, and this way they can do the digging underground without upending all of these neighborhoods. He now has 77 employees, and last year Daryl Ackerman was named the International Trenchless Digger of the Year. That is a claim to fame I have in my state. So this piece of the export pie, which we acknowledge, a lot of the exports is big businesses, and the smaller businesses do well when big businesses do well because they supply them. That's all true, but having some success stories which directly with our small and medium-sized businesses actually gives support, I believe, for competitiveness, a competitive agenda, and putting more resources into exports. In addition to that, our embassies. Our companies right now abroad are competing against companies that have embassies that is their full-time job, is basically trying to get economic business for them. And so having our embassies as focused as possible, despite all of their other duties, on this idea of exports, I think would be helpful. Leading me to my next part of the competitive agenda, which is red tape. And I use this example, it's an embassy example. The president recently wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal about the need to look at our regulations and step back and figure out which ones are obviously necessary for safety reasons, but which ones we need to look at in a new way if they're slowing us down with competitiveness and exporting. He used the example of medical device, which made me happy because I've been pushing this for a number of years. The slow process at the FDA has been made it very difficult for more investment to flow into small and medium-sized medical device development, and it is really hurting our business at a time where we should be growing medical device business because of the growing middle class in so many countries across the world. Well, another example, and this gets to the embassies, that I'll use is tourism. Tourism counts for, depending on how you look at the jobs that spawn off from it. In my state, it's 1 out of 8 employees. So you guys have to come to Minnesota. There's the Mall of America, Duluth, Minnesota, fishing lodges, largest ball of twine, world's 2nd largest hockey puck in Evelyn, Minnesota. Come on. So anyway, tourism, international tourism is down 20% since 9/11, 20 percentage points. It didn't just go away because of the economy. No. It went other places, to France, to Indonesia, to Great Britain. 20 points. Every point we've lost in international tourism is 165,000 jobs for every single point. And right now, an international tourist spends an average of $5,000 when they visit our country. You can imagine what that would mean for jobs if we could get back up to that level of our share of the international tourism market. So what's been slowing us down? Well, first of all, we have never been advertising our country abroad. Everyone else, Indonesia, they all have marketing budgets. They've been advertising our country. Finally, last year, we passed the Travel Promotion Act, which actually is a great new thing. It's going to allow our country, for the first time in our history, to advertise our tourism in our country. It's not paid for by taxpayer money. It's paid for by a $10 fee on foreign visitors visiting our country. They pay it on the visa. By the way, we're financing them all the time for their advertisement. And so that way, we are now, starting in the fall, going to start running ads about visiting our country. The committee subcommittee I head up also includes tourism. And so the other thing that's really slowing us down, getting to the embassies, is the slow rate of approving foreign tourist visas. Right now, if you're in China and you want to come to our country and spend an average of $5,000, it takes you about somewhere, there's different factors, between 65 and 95 days to get your tourist visa. If you want to go to Great Britain, it takes you 10 days. You can imagine the incentive if you're trying to plan a vacation to go somewhere else. And so Senator Blunt is now the ranking Republican on my subcommittee. He's very interested in tourism and has done a lot when he was over in the House. So we're holding a hearing on this and really want to move some of these other things, which I call red tape, that is slowing us down in so many areas. In the bill I have with Scott Brown, we actually have a requirement that for the top 20 exporting industries that the government look through all of the barriers, because they vary so much. You know, for movies, it's piracy. For medical device, it's this approval process. For tourism, I just mentioned what's going on there. All of them have unique things that I actually think could be solved, and many times solved without legislation. Last thing that I wanted to mention when it comes to this agenda is our government debt, and I bring it up because I don't want to become another Ireland or Greece. And I think it's been slowing down the investment in capital because the markets are understandably jittery about what's happening in our country when so much of our budget is financed by other entities in other countries, and we have seemed incapable of coming together to do anything about this. Now, I'm sure you weren't like really excited about our votes yesterday. Both measures went down. But I do believe now is the time to start negotiating some real debt reform. There is the Deficit Commission I mentioned before, and the group of the 6 senators, and adding to that, Senator Warner and Senator Chambliss have been negotiating something, I called it the other day in the Washington Post, an island of rationality in a sea of denial, because at least they are looking beyond simply the spending cuts, and there's no doubt we have to do some of that. We had a start yesterday, but there's many more things that we can do, everything from the work that Secretary Gates is doing with the defense budget to the work that can be done in a whole host of other areas. But we also have to look at some of the long-term structural issues. We got to start with Medicare, with health care reform. Being from Minnesota, where we have some of the lowest cost care, I think there's more we can do with delivery system reform nationally. Social Security should be on its own track so that it's very clear that the savings from any changes to Social Security go back into Social Security to keep it solvent. But we still have to talk about it, and we still have to get that track started. The Deficit Commission has some great ideas when it comes to things like taking the cap off at $106,000 for the tax and then putting it back on at $250,000, reducing some of the benefits for higher end beneficiary, looking at the age issue, but very carefully so that a month is added for each year. You have to be 28 years old under this recommendation to have an entire year added to the Social Security age, and even then they exempt the 20% of workers from that additional year, the 20% of workers who are in hard labor jobs, so that they won't have to have an extra year for retirement. I just think that there's actually a growing cry among people in their 30s and 40s after this downturn we've been in. They realize, you know what, I might need Social Security. I don't want to just say, oh, it's going to go away. So that is a very useful part of the discussions that are going on. And then when it comes to the deficit, I mentioned some of the tax ideas. I would add going back to the Clinton levels for the people. If you even set it at $1 million in income, you save $400 billion on our deficit over 10 years. Those are the things that we have to be talking about in addition to some of the spending issues. So that's what I think of when I think of a competitive agenda for this country, an agenda of innovation, an agenda of thinking anew and acting anew, to use Abraham Lincoln's words, that we just can't put our head in the sand anymore. This is obviously going to take bipartisan action. I argued back when I was at the White House back in June with the president that this is something that cries out for the kind of issue where people are willing to cross party lines and work together for the good of this country to move our country ahead. So I just want to thank you for having me today. And I don't know if you do questions or are you just eating your lunch? You guys look so good with your box lunches there. Okay, I'd be happy to do that. Answer any questions that you have so I can see you now. And I want to thank you again for having me. Okay. Okay, very good.
Thank you for your remarks. What do you see in terms of the need for policies pertaining to antitrust and intellectual property?
Well, I'm going to focus right now on the intellectual property side, and I would say that the America Invents Act, I actually named it. It was called the Patent Reform Bill before, because I think we needed to make clear what this was about. But the America Invents Act is a very good start in that it brings us more into line with some other countries in terms of the first to file issues, and it does some other things to really address the backlog at our patent office because we've fallen so behind, and there's something like, is it 700,000 inventions that are waiting patents. I think the other huge threat to our intellectual property of a much different nature is piracy. If you just sit down with people who are in the business of producing movies, who put millions and millions of dollars, and by the way, it's one of our biggest exports out of our country, they literally in 4 clicks can show you how you can get onto a rogue website, and you have to pay for the movie, a normal fee, but you're not paying the people that made that movie. You're paying crooks, right? People that have stolen their intellectual property. So I have a bill with Senator Cornyn that we're going to introduce about the penalties for that. And then we also have worked through judiciary a bill allowing the Justice Department to take down some of these websites whose sole purpose is to sell pirated property. So I would watch for that issue because it is, when it comes to intellectual property, it's one of our most biggest challenges in our country. And it's not just movies, it's obviously music, but it's everything from dresses. The designers came to see me from Project Runway. That was the only thing my daughter thought I did was cool for about a year, that Tim Gunn came to see me. But the designers are having all of their designs within a minute after they put them out. They're on some website in another country. The companies that are making everything from cars to planes see their work stolen and blueprints showing up on the internet. And it is a major, major challenge for our country is how to protect that intellectual property. Okay.
The question has to do with subsidies. How do we move towards the true cost of food, true cost of fuel, given the patchwork and politicized process of subsidizing agriculture and fossil fuels?
Okay. Well, I've been favored getting rid of some of the subsidies in the oil area when you see the profits and things that are going on there. I do think that we are going to have to have, again, I keep saying this, but it's true, a bipartisan group work on the energy issue. It's possible that the escalating oil prices we're seeing right now will be the impetus for that. We actually had a pretty good group led by Senator Conrad and Graham, and I was one of the 14 in it, working before the whole cap and trade fight started, that I thought was some productive time. We were trying to work out something with nuclear and oil and figuring out where the expanded drilling would be allowed and where it wouldn't, and also acknowledging that that was part of it, but that also biofuels and wind, solar, geothermal, waste to energy, that there is a lot of things that can go on here. And I hope we're going to get that, reconstitute that group. I call it perhaps an American energy standard, so we can get that going. And obviously it would help with environmental issues as well. On the food front, I do want to always remind people, as I'm from an ag state, that the great majority of that farm bill is about nutrition programs and food stamps. Much smaller percentage of it is the safety net that's put in place for our farmers. Last farm bill and this one actually brought back, it was incredibly less expensive than people thought because it was more of a safety net than it was, a lot of that money wasn't spent basically, and that's what you're seeing again. I get very nervous about not having any program in place as a backdrop for our farmers because of the fact that we don't want to be dependent on foreign food just like we're dependent on foreign oil. And so I think it's important to look at that program. There's some things we can do to make it more efficient. We're going to be doing some things with the milk program again, but to remember that when you look at the export value we have right now of food and what's happening with the agriculture sector in the middle of this downturn, at least our rural part of our country has not been in abject poverty. A lot of it's had to do with the fact that we have a strong agricultural production system in this country. I was a big backer of the food safety bill. I'm glad we're going to do that. I'm very concerned that the House is trying to slash some of the funding for those inspectors because it's also important that our food be safe. Last thing I'd say is working to
working with other countries is going to be key here to get with the growing hunger, the growing cost of food, to help them to develop their own food supply in addition to exporting our own is going to be key as we look at how the U.S. can aid other countries. We have to put more and more of an emphasis on agriculture. Okay? Very good. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Senator Klobuchar, for joining us. I think you can see why we invited Senator Klobuchar to keynote this event, just because of her real leadership, and not just leadership, but innovation in innovation policy. So let me close the event, first of all, thanking you all for coming. We appreciate it. As I said, this will all be up on the web tomorrow. Also, there's a new report we're issuing today around why we need a bipartisan approach to this. I want to thank Qualcomm for their partnership in this event. It was great to work with them on this. And really to thank ITIF staff, who somebody sent me an email recently and said, you must be whipping them like a rented mule because of all the great work they do. And really, I don't have to do anything. I just show up for this. So Steve Norton and Stephen Ezell, Luke Stewart, Catherine Angstad just did a great job. So please join me in thanking the ITIF staff that made this possible. All right, thank you all, and we'll see you at our next events.